we finally have more footage and gameplay from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And as a huge Final Fantasy VII fan, you can bet I've gone over every frame of the new trailer for every crumb of new information I can find. So here's everything you might have missed and everything you need to know going forward about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. First up, Rebirth has seemingly experienced a slight delay to its expected release window, which has gone from the original proposal of winter 2023 to early 2024. Even bigger news, though, is that Rebirth will be spread across 2 discs, making it the first PlayStation 5 game to require this. What we're also wondering now is whether our save files from Final Fantasy VII Remake will have any value when picking up Rebirth. They seem to be 2 separate and distinct games, so will there be an event or some timeline shakeup that means, canonically, the group's weapons, items, armor and materia are all reset? Maybe it's the event that this very trailer begins with. But hold up, before we can explain the opening to this trailer in full detail, which shows most of our party unconscious and loaded into Shinra choppers, we need to bring you up to speed quickly on the ending to Final Fantasy VII Remake and what it means. For a full and comprehensive breakdown and analysis, make sure and watch my video on that very subject. So, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a very faithful adaptation to the original 90s game up to a certain point. And then, everything changes. It is, to put it bluntly, not a remake at all. One of the biggest changes in Remake is the inclusion of hooded, ghost-like beings called Whispers, which are eventually explained by Red 13 as arbiters of fate. As I mentioned in my ending explainer video, Red 13 tells the party that these Whispers are drawn to individuals who would try and alter Destiny's course and ensure they do not. Fate, in this context, is described as a fixed state, and this fixed state is the will of the planet itself. So these Whispers act solely to ensure that events play out the way the planet intends them to. They swarm around Wedge in the slums, keeping him in place when the plate falls. They also interrupt any time someone gets close to telling Cloud his true origins, like Hojo in his lab, and when Cloud tries to intercept Sephiroth on top of the Shinra building. They stop the group's getaway truck getting blasted by a chopper to preserve the flow of destiny. From these particular instances, we can draw a pretty strong conclusion that the fate the planet has in store for everyone is in line with the events of the original game. One of the biggest examples of this in the remake is when the Whispers directly intervene and save Barrett's life when he is stabbed by Sephiroth in Shinra HQ, an event that would have had major repercussions to the timeline if it had been allowed to play out. So then, towards the end of Remake, as the party are trying to escape the city, the Whispers all converge on Shinra HQ, huge clouds of them protecting the building from destruction and stopping anyone from getting in or out. The story then deviates from the original timeline again by having Sephiroth present, disrupting the natural order and the planet's will. The planet, all the voices that make up the livestream, cry out in pain, and all of a sudden we cut to a completely different scene of Zack Fair, a pivotal character in the original PlayStation 1 game, whose death is essentially the catalyst for Cloud becoming the hero that he is by the end of the adventure. Remake shows scenes from the moments leading up to when Zack canonically dies, except now there are Whispers that no one can see floating around and swarming Midgar in the distance. Back with the party, Sephiroth cuts a path through the Whispers, literally and figuratively stepping outside of their influence and therefore the established timeline. Aerith then follows suit, also defying the Whispers and creating a different path and claiming that from now on, it's the point of no return. This is Destiny's crossroads. What she, and by extension the game's creators, are saying is that this is where they turn off the path of the remake and into something totally different. This is, in more ways than one, a rebirth. Aerith explains that if they take this course, the party will be changing more than fate itself, they'll be changing their very selves. A pretty bold statement of intent for things to come in the next game, wouldn't you say? Stepping through, the party is then confronted by the Whisper Harbinger, and lots of smaller Whispers, fighting to protect a future timeline that created them. This is where the party see glimpses of their possible future, scenes we know are in the original timeline. And they make an active stand against them coming to pass, fighting against the fates the planet has already decided for them. The Whispers are defeated, but then the party fights Sephiroth, who isolates Cloud and brings him to the edge of creation, where they basically act out their final showdown from the original game before Sephiroth states, "It isn't time for that yet." Anyway, back with Zack, the Whispers are dissipated in a cloud of golden light that's reminiscent of Aerith's magic, implying their disappearance is down to the party's actions. Zack then carries on his journey after the point at which we know he canonically dies, and later it's shown, via a crisp packet bearing an altered version of a cartoon dog, that we're in a different but somewhat altered timeline to the one the majority of Final Fantasy VII Remake has just taken place in. This, plus a montage of other altered events, strongly suggests that defeating the Whispers on the highway has now opened up at least one new version of the Final Fantasy VII story that we know, one where Zack is alive as the events of the original game play out. My big question is, will Rebirth feature these timelines playing out simultaneously? While it's possible the Remake party stepped outside of their timeline and into a different one, at the end of Remake we see Remake Cloud and Zack passing by one another on separate but still somewhat linked paths. Maybe Rebirth will allow us to play out one version of the game that is more akin to the story we know from the original, before exploring an alternate version of events of what happens in a world where Zack never dies. Which brings us right back to the beginning of the Rebirth trailer. Now, one possible explanation for what we see in the news report from the Shinra News Network, Barret, Tifa, Red 13 and Aerith all seriously injured or dead, being loaded onto Shinra choppers with no Cloud in sight, could simply be that exposure to the Whispers has made them ill, just as the livestream did to individuals in the original game. It's more likely, however, that what we're seeing is what would have happened, or should we say, what has happened in the Zack is Alive timeline. With no mercenary Cloud, the team don't succeed in taking down Shinra or the version of Sephiroth they potentially meet. Or this could all just be a false vision put in Cloud's head by Sephiroth. Visual and audio glitches either side of this news report, along with a telltale black feather, indicate Sephiroth's involvement in this scene either way. The next bit of text, "The unknown journey continues," is a direct callback to the end of Remake, which said, "The unknown journey will continue." The choice of very specific words here definitely hammers home the fact that this game is going somewhere that fans may not expect. From there we see the party step outside into the world, whether that's from Midgar or beyond Calm. You can still see industrial remnants of Midgar, some discarded pipes amongst the greenery. The Chocobo farm here is pretty interesting because as Cloud approaches it, you can see that Aerith and Red 13 already have fixed positions in the grounds ahead of him. So maybe, after a short stay and a lengthy story flashback in Calm, the farm will be a peaceful hub of sorts for the party to fall back to as they explore the surrounding grasslands area before braving the marshlands leading to the Mithril mines, and of course, the Midgar Zolom. It's also fun to finally see the party ride Chocobos out in the world, and interesting to see new commands, Scent and Scour available alongside Sprint and Dismount. Maybe you'll be able to hunt for treasure with your feathered friends. Next in the trailer, we skip continents entirely and see Red 13's beloved grandfather, don't ask, Bugenhagen, explaining the importance of the livestream to the party. Now, chronologically, this is really far ahead of everything else we see in this trailer, but it's a pivotal scene in the original game for understanding livestream and its key role in the story. It's also just really nice to see Bugenhagen so closely resembling his look and concept art from the original game. Although we didn't get to see that iconic green ball he whizzes around on just yet. After another shot of a big pipeline, possibly in the area surrounding Junon, we see the party gathered in Calm, where in the original, Cloud fills the party in on his history with Sephiroth. But here, as they've already met Sephiroth, it takes on a slightly different tone. After that, there's a noticeable audiovisual glitch again as the scene cuts to Sephiroth copies making their pilgrimage to the Northern Crater. An earlier voiceover in this trailer tells us they're now called Shadows of the Man, which is, nice and ominous. Directly following that, we're in what looks like the Mithril mines with Barret and Red 13. No other party members are visible, which suggests that there are times that the party is split, as in Remake, and players will have to adapt to the controllable roster as it changes. The other thing that's noticeable about this scene is that the rock creature they are fighting does not appear in the original game. The Mithril Mine is a relatively small location that immediately follows the grasslands area containing the Chocobo farm and the marshlands. It's the pass the party travel through, narrowly avoiding Giant Snake the Midgar Zolom, in order to reach the Junon area. Its main function is facilitating a run-in with the Turks and introducing their newest recruit Elena, which it looks like it's going to do in Rebirth too. Unlike the original though, there's blows traded here, but it does give us the opportunity to see a very fun team up with Cloud and Tifa providing cover for Aerith to unleash some magic on Elena. We also see some combat taking place on what appears to be the world map, and markers showing that there is quite a bit of distance to be covered, which really is unsurprising because, well, 2 discs, and also this is an entire continent we're spanning, and in the original game, all that was apparently map-worthy on that entire continent was a big city, a small town, a huge cannon, a mine, a fort shaped like a big bird, and a farm. So, you know, there are a lot of potential things that could be added here. I also really like the fact that terrain and distance seems to be mixed up slightly for open world combat, seeing Bart on a bit of a hill here for example, and if you look closely to his left, you can see what appears to be Midgar in the far distance. Then we get our first proper glimpse of Junon as seen on its approach, and on top, we see the iconic airship, the Highwind, which honestly looks absolutely enormous in the context of how big we know Junon to be. Oh, side note and potential spoilers, I cannot wait to see Tifa dive off the end of that cannon. Now, what's really interesting about the next shot of battle, aside from seeing a bit more of Red 13's combat, is that if you look closely, you can see both Aerith and Tifa in their fighting stances circling the action way in the background, despite the fact that they are not in the combat lineup. So does this mean there's going to be a party switching mechanic introduced, or is it so that they can jump in to help briefly and be used for synergy attacks? About those combo attacks, here's one in action as Aerith creates a magical force field for Tifa to jump into and press the attack on the enemy. I wonder if the 5 little horizontal lines that we now see underneath each character's action bar is something to do with those synergy attacks. How many uses they have in any one battle, for example. In the next shot, we see Yuffie, fresh from her star turn in intermission, teaming up with Red 13 for a synergy attack before we cut to Cloud and Bart performing one of their own. I wonder, and really hope, there are synergy attacks for any and all combinations of party members. Given that synergy moves were introduced via Yuffie in intermission, I wonder if it'll fall to Yuffie to teach the team how to use them in Rebirth. I'm also super curious as to how Yuffie will be introduced here. In the original game, she was an entirely optional character and you had to follow a few steps in order to add her to your game. But here, it's almost certain that she'll be integrated into the party as part of the main quest. I also wonder if this moment right here could be where she's stealing Cloud's materia. It was a great and quite creative moment in the original game when you went into a fight, suddenly noticing all your materia was gone and going on a quest to retrieve it all, only for Yuffie to eventually return it, all jumbled up and in the wrong slots of course, so I hope we'll see a fun diversion like it appear somewhere in Rebirth. This fight seems to be the Genova birth battle that takes place below deck after the party sneaks aboard the cargo hold of a ship and travels from Junon to Costa del Sol. Now, while the tone of this battle is of course quite serious, this moment in the original game is preceded by maybe one of its most ridiculous sequences. In order to sneak aboard the ship, everyone bar Yuffie, who stays hidden due to her seasickness, needs a disguise. So while the girls dress as Shinra soldiers, Bart wears a very fetching sailor outfit. But then, Red 13 also dresses as a soldier and awkwardly walks on just his hind legs. And apparently, this was passable enough to get them onto the ship. Now that would be an almost impossible scene to do seriously with Rebirth's photorealistic graphics, but it's just too funny for them not to include, surely. Anyhow, we then briefly see Cloud as a Sephiroth copy, before the audiovisual glitch then switches us to a scene familiar to those who've played the original game. Young Tifa, in her iconic cowgirl outfit, confronting Sephiroth in the Nibelheim reactor. It's accompanied by new voiceover, Sephiroth saying, presumably to Cloud, "You know that I killed her, so who is she?" This is interesting for a few reasons. Firstly, in the original game, Tifa did not die, but she was badly wounded, and was found by Cloud before he went to confront Sephiroth himself. Both Tifa and Cloud's recollection of the Nibelheim event 5 years ago, how their memories differ and eventually align, is a huge plot point in the original game. There is supposed to be confusion around it. As Tifa states earlier in the trailer, as far as she knows, Cloud was not in Nibelheim during that trip. That's because, again, spoiler warning, Cloud never made Soldier First Class, and at that point was just a regular Shinra grunt. Returning home after having made a big show of his hopes and dreams to Tifa, he was embarrassed. And seeing that she was to be the group's guide to the reactor, he hid his face the entire time under his mask. After all of the events that follow that event, Cloud's memories merge with those of Zack's, who was there with Sephiroth as a Soldier First Class. So during Cloud's original storytelling flashback to Nibelheim, where he explains to the group how he witnessed Sephiroth turn bad firsthand, Tifa knows this isn't quite what actually happened, but she doesn't say anything. In the original game, we have no reason not to believe what Cloud says is true at this point, and it's only later, after Sephiroth messes with Cloud's head to the point that he thinks he is just a clone of Sephiroth and not a real person of his own, that Tifa and Cloud piece together the reality of the situation, and it unfolds as a big plot twist that Cloud really was there all along. Of course, now with this retelling, that shock value is gone, and so the story is being reframed. Sephiroth is messing with Cloud's head way earlier and trying to make him believe that Tifa actually died. And even in the original, he could well have thought that she did. Her martial arts trainer Zangan rescued her from the destruction of Nibelheim and brought her to Midgar. Cloud didn't see her again until much later. Anyway, all that to say that the line seems to be Sephiroth's way of getting inside Cloud's head and priming him to deliver the black materia later on down the road. Or, I don't know, maybe Tifa really will be killed in one of the timelines. Who knows? Personally, I'll riot if that's the case, but we'll just have to wait and see. I'm only partially kidding.
Who is she?
Where exactly will Rebirth end? As we already know, this version of Final Fantasy VII is poised to be a trilogy. So one of the questions that's on my mind right now is, where will Rebirth end? It goes all the way up to Cosmo Canyon seemingly, so will it also include the Gold Saucer, for example? Will we finally get a glimpse of everyone's favourite emo Vincent Valentine? Or maybe even get the chance to free him from the Shinra Mansion basement? I am so excited to see him for the first time. Anyway, that's pretty much everything that we've gleaned from this trailer, so let me know what you think. As I stated all the way back, I am still unsure about where Rebirth is headed in terms of mixing up the original story, but I'm intrigued either way to see where this goes. Let me know what you think in the comments, and obviously subscribe, as we will have lots of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth content coming up later on down the road. Until then, I'm gonna mosey, but thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!
But as far as I know, Cloud was never in Nibelheim 5 years ago.
The life stream. It is the very essence of our star. The blood coursing through its planetary veins.